Prime Minister Netanyahu rejects Donald Trump's recent remarks about Muslims. The State of Israel respects all religions and strictly guarantees the rights of all its citizens. At the same time, Israel is fighting against militant Islam that targets Muslims, Christians, and Jews alike and threatens the entire world. As for the meeting with Mr. Trump that was set some 2 weeks ago, the Prime Minister decided earlier this year on a uniform policy to agree to meet with all presidential candidates from either party who visit Israel and ask for a meeting. This policy does not represent an endorsement of any candidate or his or her views. Rather, it is an expression of the importance that Prime Minister Netanyahu attributes to the strong alliance between Israel and the United States. Prime Minister's office press release on Donald Trump's recent statement. Of course, the recent statement that they're talking about is Donald Trump's proposal to ban all immigration into the United States for Muslims, which is not a bad proposal. In fact, one of the first states, modern states, to implement such a proposal, and it's actually law in this particular nation, is Israel. So Prime Minister Netanyahu rejects the United States protecting itself during a time of war, but has no qualms doing it for their own country, which is incredibly hypocritical. I'd just like to say, I don't think, in fact I know, that Israel has no particular affinity or love for the United States. The reverse is not true. Of course, if you're a card-carrying member of the Republican Party, you have this deep-seated, unconditional love for the State of Israel and everything that it does, no matter how horrendous, how hypocritical, or how contrary to the well-being and the goals and the values of the United States. So it's interesting, when you're a Republican, you have to actually not just run for the presidency of the United States, you have to run to be president of Israel. You know, it's a pretty sad case. I think that's the only nation in the world that has such a privileged position. Why we give it to them? It's obvious. They occupy a useful part of the Middle Eastern region. Allegedly, we share the same Judeo-Christian values. I don't know that we exercise our alleged adherence to those values in the same way. In fact, I know we don't, judging just by the Prime Minister's statement here in response to Donald Trump's proposal. So, of course, Donald Trump had he had planned to go to Israel, so that's why this is particularly relevant. And this just happened on December 10th, I believe. But Donald Trump had a tweet in response in which he said, "I have decided to postpone my trip to Israel and to schedule my meeting with Netanyahu at a later date after I become President of the United States." And he later clarified, and I'm getting this from CNN, he clarified that he didn't want to put Netanyahu in a tough position because Netanyahu's getting some flack at home from his own people who don't want Trump to enter Israel. So isn't that interesting? They don't want Muslims to enter Israel, and then when Donald Trump tries to implement the same policy that they have, they say they don't want Donald Trump in Israel. What does this mean? How is this acceptable to the United States? It's not just a small hypocrisy or something that can be glossed over. This is a major policy of the State of Israel for their own protection in the region. It's a good policy. It protects them, and it would protect us for the same exact reasons. This is what I like about Donald Trump's response. Now, whether or not he's doing it because he doesn't want to put Netanyahu in a tough position doesn't particularly matter, because most people aren't going to read into the details. They're just going to see the tweet, which says, "I've decided to postpone my trip. I'll see you when I'm the president," which is a pretty tough response. I like it. And the reason I like it is because most people seeing this or hearing about it or just reading about it here in the CNN article are going to assume that Donald Trump is hitting back at Israel, is saying, well, when I'm the president of the United States, I'll come in there, you'll have to accept me. I mean, at that point. So I like it because it falls in line with the strategy that Donald Trump has been using so far, which is to attack his opponents, and attack the people who insult him or attack him first. So in this case, he's condemned by the prime minister, and then it looks like, to the average viewer, that Trump, this or maybe Netanyahu canceled the meeting, or Trump did on his own volition, and gave a pretty typical Trump response. And this is important because it shows that he's not beholden to the interests of Israel. And that's key, because that's been the key to his strategy thus far, that he's not beholden to special interests, that he's not beholden to the big donors, he's not beholden to multinational corporations, and most recently he's not beholden to the Saudis. He insulted one of the princes who denounced his policy. So I think he called him dopey, which is one of his favorite new phrases. So I like this response. I don't know what it means. I hope he capitalizes on it more. I think this will be to his benefit in the Republican Party, which, frankly, is only interested in Israel's well-being because its politicians are. And its politicians are interested in Israel's well-being because they are told to by their masters, who are deeply influenced by the Israeli lobby in the United States. This leads me to my next point. Who's going to be the first one to take a shot at Trump? I mean, like a bullet or some other method. Who's gonna try to kill him first? I mean, it's just a matter of time. A rogue candidate like Donald Trump cannot survive in a nation that is controlled by multinational corporations whose bottom line is their only concern. If someone comes to upset the system, they need to be removed. If they cannot be removed politically, they have to be removed physically. And that's what's going to happen. I mean, so we already saw it in the news today. Republicans are meeting to discuss what a brokered convention would look like, which we haven't had since maybe the 70s. 76, I think, or it might have been, perhaps 76 was the year there was a brokered convention. That would make sense. It would have been Reagan and Ford. So now they're meeting because they're expecting it. And they're not expecting it. They know that if Trump takes a plurality of delegates to the nomination, to the convention, that he will get the nomination. So they have to stop him. And by that point, it'll be too late unless they throw all their weight behind a single candidate to take him down, which they are hesitant to do because, A, they don't know who they can pick, and that, more importantly, they don't know who they can pick who can also defeat Donald Trump. I could tell them what they can do. I'm not the first person to say it. I thought it for a while, but it's easy. They could line up behind Ted Cruz, and they could have a chance, a small chance, at taking out Donald Trump. But they won't line up behind Cruz. because he's also a troublemaker. Less of a troublemaker for sure, but he still is one. He's not liked in the Senate. He probably filibusters too much. He he rankles the Republican leadership, and that's not to the establishment's liking. Now, if they got behind him, they could get the establishment support behind Cruz, and that's also not going to deter many diehard Cruz supporters who started off Cruz supporters and probably don't intend on leaving. Um, so they could line up behind Cruz. But even that is beyond the consideration of the Republican establishment for some unknown reason. They would rather compromise with liberal Democrats. They would rather, and this is an article just out today by S.E. Cupp, who's a CNN contributor, allegedly a conservative. She said she would have no choice but to vote for Hillary Clinton if it came down to a general election contest between Donald Trump and Hillary Clinton. She would have no choice but to vote for Clinton to save the Republican Party from itself. Isn't that interesting? What a hero. What a hero. Thank you, S.E. Cupp. Now, she obviously thinks this because she thinks that the Donald Trump brand is damaging, and that he will be, a controversial president. People have called him a fascist, made Nazi comparisons, all the old tricks. I mean, Democrats have been doing this at least since the 60s, probably the 50s, making the Nazi comparisons. You know, just think back to the old, the 1968, the debates between William F. Buckley Jr. and Gore Vidal, right? So, just to give you a little context in case you don't know or haven't heard about this, in 1968 there was the Republican National Convention, followed shortly thereafter by the Democratic National Convention, and ABC wanted to boost their ratings, so they wanted to get two intellectual titans from the liberal and conservative spheres and have pre-debates before each convention was aired on ABC. So they selected William F. Buckley Jr., who's obviously the founder of the National Review, and they selected Gore Vidal, who is the American essayist, and he's written a number of novels and some nonfiction material. So they got these two guys and they put them head to head. I think they had 10 debates, maybe 10 or 11 debates, and things came to a head. And I believe the second to last debate, when they were discussing Vietnam, and I think it was Gore Vidal who actually instigated the fight by calling William F. Buckley Jr. a crypto-Nazi. Now, back then, to call someone a Nazi is a bigger deal than it is today. A, because today it's lost its shine. I mean, everyone calls someone a Nazi. That's the argument of first resort to impugn someone and to try to defeat their argument is to just compare it to something Hitler would have done or the Nazis would have done. Well, that's one reason that it's lost its shine, but it's also, we're 70 years removed from World War II when we were fighting the Nazis and they were our enemies. And William F. Buckley Jr. actually made that counter on the spot after calling Vidal a queer, which he was. William F. Buckley Jr. said, "I fought the Nazis. I was in that war. How dare you?" So those were fighting words back then. It's not like it is today. But this is William F. Buckley Jr., okay? This is a smart guy, a well-mannered guy, sort of an aristocrat. He wasn't this, he wasn't a guy fighting in the trenches or anything like that in terms of the, conservative sphere. He wasn't, an Alex Jones. He's not inflammatory in any way. So this guy was a leading light of the conservative intellectual movement throughout the 60s, 70s, 80s. Um, so it's rather telling that this tactic uh, can be used on anyone and will be used on anyone. So, what's most interesting to me is all the establishment Republicans who are saying, who are using the Democratic strategy of calling Donald Trump a Nazi, which is beyond comprehension that they would even do that. You like to think that being at least mildly conservative, that they, would have some kind of inhibition to using that kind of language. I mean, that's for children. That's for the Democrats. That's for the liberals. That's what children do. Republicans don't do that. These ones do. This is how desperate they've become. They're the ones who are turning into the liberal adversary by using their own tactics. So they'll use those tactics, but they seem to think that the Democrats won't use them on a Republican candidate who is palatable enough for liberals and independents. Of course, we know that's not true. We know that they would call John McCain, Mitt Romney, or anyone else. They would call Jeb Bush. They would call Marco Rubio. They would call all these people racists. That would be their go-to strategy, because it's been their go-to strategy for over half a century to every single candidate who's ever run as a Republican. They did it to Nixon. They did it to Reagan. It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter if you're a far-right conservative, like Reagan somewhat approximated, or if you're a middle-of-the-road guy, like Nixon. Perhaps the only one who escaped this was Eisenhower, right? So obviously, it'd be kind of hard to call him a Nazi, since he, in fact, defeated the Nazis. And there you go, a Republican. And they have the nerve to call us Nazis. So, I'm not enthusiastic, as you can clearly tell, about this capitulation by influential people in the Republican establishment. And by the Republican establishment, everyone uses this terminology, but it refers to the kingmakers in the party, so mostly donors, yes. It refers to party leaders in the Senate and Congress, of course, but it also refers to commentators and supposed intellectuals. So people like S.E. Cupp, who is given this massive platform. She's always on CNN. She writes columns. People like that. So those kind of people, if they want to align themselves with the establishment, it's fairly easy for them to do it, and that's what a number of them have done. Now, I understand the arguments, the conservative arguments against a Trump candidacy, but they're not very good. There's a couple of them. They've called him a statist. He is a statist. He's absolutely a statist. It's true. He wields, or would wield, the power of the state to affect the policies that he wants in place. In terms of economic stance, he has not shown too many conservative proclivities. Now, he has, often talked about the need to keep the minimum wage low, to keep American businesses competitive by not implementing more taxes. But he's not one of these guys who's arguing for a flat tax or arguing for a fair tax or any of the other typical conservative tax plans that get marched out every election season and never get into place anyway. So who are we kidding? Really? Alright, so we're going to have Jeb Bush. Is he going to come in with a some kind of flat tax? I don't know what Jeb Bush's tax plan is, but let's say he did. Let's say he wants a flat tax. Do we honestly trust that Jeb Bush is going to go in and do that? Do we honestly trust that Marco Rubio is going to go in and give us the flat tax that we haven't had in over a century? No. And the Republicans say this every single, election, and it's just to get elected. So the fact that Donald Trump isn't saying it is probably more to his credit, because he's at least not pretending. So what else isn't he conservative on? Well, so the newest proposal that really got the establishment up in arms is the Muslim litmus test for immigrants, which they are crying out is un-American. Freedom of religion is what everyone keeps saying. It's interesting that conservatives who respect the sovereignty of the United States, or at least are supposed to in theory, now want to confer the rights granted in the United States Constitution to United States citizens onto everybody on the globe. I mean, that's essentially what they're doing. If you're an immigrant, you're by definition not an American citizen, and the Constitution does not apply to you. This is why we can try terrorists in military tribunals in the United States. They don't need to be tried in Guantanamo Bay. We do it because we have the property. But they can be tried anywhere in the United States in a military tribunal. So they're taking the liberal argument. They're taking the Democrat stance that you can't have military tribunals in the United States, and they're wrong. And they're wrong for the same exact reason that they're wrong about a litmus test, a religious litmus test, being acceptable as a way of gauging immigration. And that's because the Constitution does not apply to you if you're not a United States citizen. So this continues to be a point of contention between Trump and the Republican establishment. So we know Donald J. Trump is not a conservative. However, he and he alone would address the single most important issue the United States is facing. So let me back up for a second. I am not someone who is keen on supporting people who promote progressive taxes, who have a number of ties to the establishment, essentially someone like Trump. I'm an ideological libertarian on economic issues. If I had to pick a presidential candidate who most resembled my viewpoints, it would probably be Rand Paul, maybe Ted Cruz. So that's who I would pick if I was choosing someone to be my ideological mirror. But that's not what we pick for our president. Because the president's job is not to be an ideologue. If that were the president's job, my choice would be easy. I'd just pick the person who agrees with most of the things I agree with. Unfortunately, that's not what life is like. The world is not run by ideologies. The world is run by pragmatists. Ideologies are nice to have until they cannot be applied in the situation that presents itself. Conservatives need to choose the tool that works best for the situation. I like to compare this to the 2008 election. At the time, we were coming off of 8 years of the George W. Bush presidency, and we needed badly to run away from his legacy. His legacy was war. It wasn't just war for the sake of it. It wasn't war itself was not the problem. The fact that it was a misguided war for a faulty reason and prosecuted incorrectly, very poorly, is the reason why we had to run away from the George W. Bush legacy. So, in order to run away from the George W. Bush legacy, the conservative grassroots movement wanted someone who wasn't a warmonger and who was an actual fiscal conservative. And this explains the Ron Paul revolution, so-called, in 2008, where he garnered a massively unexpected amount of support that didn't win him anything, but was still incredible in its own right. By 2012, the guy had tripled, maybe quadrupled his support base. He came in second in a number of primary and caucus contests, and ultimately lost, but was in it for the long haul, and really started a movement. And now, in between those two times, you also had the Tea Party movement, which was a very fiscally conservative driven movement. So you can see in the conservative movements between 2008 and 2012 was driven by the moment. So it was driven A, by the George W. Bush presidency, the failure of it, and it was also driven by the first 4 years of Barack Obama's presidency, which, despite a Nobel Peace Prize award, didn't seem to change the foreign policy. And this is interesting, very interesting, because at the time, in those first 4 years, Barack Obama was getting hit by the right on foreign policy because he was too much like George W. Bush. And that's distinctly different from what he's getting hit from the right on today. So in the first 4 years, the Peace Prize was laughable because his drone program had massively increased, and he had killed Anwar al-Awlaki in Yemen, an American citizen. So he won the Peace Prize for that, I guess. I don't know. He also took out Gaddafi in Libya. In order to nab Osama bin Laden, he had to violate Pakistani sovereignty. So a number of things proved his extreme and perhaps unexpected willingness to perpetuate the George W. Bush foreign policy. And in those first 4 years, the hits were coming from the right because of his continued use of that policy. Now that's distinctly different from how it is today. The last several years of his presidency, he's getting hit from the right because he is not aggressive enough with ISIS. He made the red line in Syria. Assad, if you use chemical weapons, we're coming at you. We're coming at you hard. That's the red line you shall not cross. And of course, Assad crossed it because he knew President Obama was full of shit. So he crossed it because he knew there would be no repercussions. He knew what the president was made of. He knew this guy was, a lawyer. Before that, he was a community organizer. Before that, he's a 2-year senator with some lofty liberal ideals that swiftly faded. The guy's a joke. So, if you don't think the leaders of the world can see our president the same way we see him, you're living in a dream world. They see him better than we see him. We have to contend with the liberal media that blows Obama's horn 24 hours a day, 7 days a week on the 24-hour news cycle and on the internet. The rest of the world doesn't have that misfortune. They can see him for who he is, and they know he's weak, and they know that he doesn't mean what he says, and they know he's conflicted, and they know he doesn't like to play politics, and they know he's stubborn, and they know that he's not very aggressive. So that's why Assad crossed the line, because he knew there would be no repercussions, and he knew he had Putin in his back pocket. So he was able to do whatever he wanted to do without with impunity. So that's our president in a nutshell. But to get back onto the original point here, which was looking at how the conservative movement utilized the time to attack its adversaries. So, just as a recap, 2008 to 2012, we'll say, we had a conservative movement, a rising libertarian movement in the Republican Party, a libertarian wing that brought people like Rand Paul into office, Thomas Massey into Congress, what's that guy's name? Justin Amash into Congress. A strong, a robust libertarian wing. The right wing of the Republican Party was applauding Rand Paul's filibuster of John Brennan's CIA appointment because the Obama administration would not admit that it wouldn't use drones on American citizens. I mean, talk about grandstanding. But the right wing ate it up. They loved it. I mean, that was the times. That was the sign of the times. And the weapon to use against Barack Obama, and the weapon to use against the horrible legacy that George W. Bush left behind, was to take up the libertarian mantle. And I was all for it, and I did it myself. And I developed a number of, libertarian beliefs, which I still hold. I still hold them. But the times have changed. A new weapon is needed. It's not the libertarian weapon. That movement is long gone. And if you need an example of it, look no further than Rand Paul's 1% in the polls. The libertarian movement is gone. So now we have to look at what would be the tool that we could use to defeat Hillary Clinton. And not just defeat her, but defeat her, take the presidency, maintain majorities in the Senate and in the House of Representatives, and make substantial conservative changes to the way our country is run. What can we do? Well, the number one issue that Donald Trump picked up on, that no one else seemed to really notice, was immigration. I mean, that's where he got his momentum from, was the immigration issue. No one thought that was a big deal. No one thought too many Americans cared about that. The establishment certainly didn't think so, because the establishment, I think, lacks an ability to analyze situations. I have a feeling that a lot of these columnists, like S.C. Cupp or anyone else who's spending their career now at, whether it's at National Review, which has declined severely since the firebrand William F. Buckley originally started it. But all these people spend all their time trying to take down Trump 24/7. I mean, that's what these guys get paid to do now. It's rather humorous to watch, but none of them could have anticipated his strength, and none of them anticipated the immigration issue's importance to voters. And that's because they didn't have the foresight to notice that immigration is not just about brown people coming into the United States. Immigration is tied to jobs. If cheap labor is coming into the United States, and a multinational corporation can get away with paying them less than they would have to pay an American citizen who demands more in terms of pay, then they're going to take advantage of it, and they're going to buy every politician to make sure that illegal immigration is entirely tolerated and eventually made no longer illegal. So Trump can come in and see that that's an issue that is tied to jobs. And where does jobs fall on the currently in terms of American concerns? It's number one, and it's been number one since the economic malaise that hit in 2008, late 2007. Jobs. People need jobs because they don't have them. People need jobs that are currently being occupied by illegal immigrants from third world countries who bring with them not just families who become dependent on the welfare state that we've established in this country, but they bring with them crime and third world problems, including drugs and cartel wars in El Paso, which is just over the border from Ciudad Juarez in Mexico, which has 10,000 Mexican troops stationed there because the city is so embattled. Did you know that in the last 4 years, so I think it's between 2010 and 2014 if I'm not mistaken, 90,000 people have been killed in the cartel wars in Mexico alone. 90,000. That is 4 times the number of people killed in the Syrian civil war in the same amount of time. And of course we're told, oh, it's not a big deal. Oh, the Mexican border is not a big deal. But ISIS. Oh, but save Israel. Save Israel. Thousands of miles away when we have a war raging 4 times the size of the war raging in Syria. And there's just no interest from the political class because it benefits them. And I think that's sick. I think it's sick. It's sadistic. It's beyond selfish. These are people's lives we're talking about. But that's not what the political class cares about. That's what Donald Trump cares about. And he perceived that that was an issue in the United States, and he took it up as his cause, and he's the champion of that cause, and now everyone knows that he is the only one who's ever going to do anything about it, because he's the only one who means what he says. I had someone with a retort to that who said, Trump's a con man, which I thought was pretty interesting, because con men usually are out to make money. That's my perception of what a con man is. So I'm wondering if Trump's such a con man, and he's just saying all these things so he can get into office, or as Mark Cuban said, Trump's the guy in the bar who'll say anything to fuck the girl he's talking to. And he's just doing the same thing, except he's gonna fuck America. That's what Mark Cuban said. Right? So if that's the case, why does he want to fuck America? He wants more money? I mean, you don't make too much as the President of the United States. You make a substantial amount, but nothing compared to what Donald Trump makes sitting at home with his beautiful wife in his giant hotels. So there's no monetary incentive, and now you can say there's other incentives, that he wants some kind of power or influence. But there's nothing the presidency can give him that he cannot get already. And if it's just power and influence he wants, well, that's not a con man. He stands nothing to gain by becoming the President of the United States, who will immediately become hated by about 50% of the population. And then in this case that would be the Democrats, right? So you have nothing to gain if you want to be liked, if you want to run a business, if you want to garner influence. You have nothing to gain by becoming president of the United States. So that Donald Trump is a con man makes no sense. Um, and I think people realize that, and they see the authenticity, and they see that he will not stand, to be insulted by people who are upset that they can't buy him out. So Donald Trump intuited what the problem of the day was, and that's the weapon. That's the weapon that the Republican Party has to use in order to achieve victory. This is the times. You can put up a Marco Rubio, this guy who waffles and he's just another, milk toast Mitt Romney. You can put up a guy like Marco Rubio, and you can put up a guy like Jeb Bush. These guys are going to fail. They're just not going to win. And even if they do win, they will achieve nothing worthwhile, because the greatest, most important single issue of our time is to protect our country from the invasion, not only from Mexico, but from the radical Islamic world. That's all there is to it. We have to preserve this nation, give it a chance for the future. If you want a libertarian paradise with low taxes, in a prosperous society with peaceful people, you can't allow the third world to invade our country. You simply can't allow it. That has to be stopped. They're destroying the welfare state. They're absolutely going to submerge this country. And that is of prime importance. There is nothing more important than that. So what I would say to you is consider or reconsider, if you're on the fence here, the importance of electing someone like Donald Trump. I mean, I'm in his corner. This is my first episode here. A lot of these people try to hide their intentions there, or maybe they just don't know yet. It is early, that's true. But there isn't a better tool for the time, and it's a good tool, and good things will happen because of this. I've already predicted that Donald Trump wins the nomination. I think once he gets in the ring with Hillary, she's not going to stand a chance. He's going to roll her up and smoke her, have a nice single malt scotch, neat, while he does it. She's going to be trying to whip out her 15-point plans, and he's going to be telling it like it is, the way he does, and that's what sticks. That's what sticks to the American people, and they're going to see it. Also, I think he's going to attack to the left. He's going to go to the center once he gets elected, or nominated, I should say. He's going to attack to the center, especially on economic issues. He's going to paint himself as someone who's palatable to the center. He's going to keep his common sense solutions that appeal not just to hard right-wing Democrats. The polls show this. He has massive influence in all wings of the Republican Party and among independents. So he has massive appeal. These are common sense solutions. These are not, without merit. These are not, this isn't what Hitler would do. All right. So I think you need to reconsider supporting him, especially if you're of the right wing. You have to recognize the moment. You have to see the moment. So this has been a production of my first show. I don't like to use that word because I don't have like an in-stage audience here or anything like that. I feel like I have to earn a viewer or two before I can call it a show. But thanks for joining me. I'll be back next week.